In this video, we are going to learn about principles of systematic zoology and topics related to taxonomy. So let's start learning about this topic. First, we are going to start learning about the science of taxonomy. The amount of diversity in the living world is staggering, and about 1 million species of animals and 500,000 species of plants have already been described, and estimate on the number of still undescribed living species range from 3 to 10 million. An estimate of 500 million for the extinct species is consistent and known facts. Each species may exist in numerous different forms like sex, age, class, seasonal forms, morphs, and other phenomena. It would be impossible to deal with this enormous diversity if it were not ordered and classified. Systematic zoology endeavors to order the rich biodiversity of the animal world and to develop methods and principles to make this task possible. So, taxonomy and systematics. The study of organic diversity has changed its objectives and enlarged its scope in the course of history. As happens in any branch of science, a detailed history will be presented, but some of it may be anticipated here in order to make clear subtle changes in the meanings of commonly used terms or systematics. The ancients looked for a natural order or cosmos which would explain the bewildering discovery of phenomena. They attempted to discover the true nature of things and approached the classification of inanimate objects and living beings by the procedures of logic. The major purpose of a classification was to serve as an identification key, and the philosophy of the early taxonomists was well suited for the utilitarian purpose of the taxonomy, and the objective shifted, and the interests of taxonomists broadened. After 1859, organic diversity was interpreted as a result of evolutionary divergence. No longer was the interested merely in producing identification key. He now interpreted groups of organisms as descendants of common ancestors, and inevitably he becomes interested in the path of causation responsible for evolutionary changes. So the term systematics stems from the Latinized Greek word systema, which applies to the systems of classification developed by the early naturalists, notably Linnaeus, and the term taxonomy is derived from the Greek words taxis, arrangement, and nomos, law, and was first proposed in its French form by de Candolle for the theory of plant classification. Analogies to astronomy, agronomy, economy, etc. It is correctly formed and need not be amended. It agrees best with current thinking to define it as follows: like taxonomy is the theory and practice of classifying organisms. The term systematic stems from the Latinized Greek word systema as applied to the systems of classification developed by the early naturalists, notably Linnaeus. We follow Simpson's modern redefinition of this term. Like systematics is the scientific study of the kinds and diversity of organisms and of any and all relationships among them. Or more simply, systematics is the science of the diversity of organisms. The word relationship is not used in a narrow phylogenetic sense, but is broadly conceived to include all biological relationships among organisms. This explains why such a broad area of common interest has developed between systematics, evolutionary biology, ecology, and behavioral biology. Then, place of systematics in biology. Systematics is unique among the biological species in its dominant concern with diversity. In all subdivisions of fundamental biology, the main concern is the basic process and mechanisms shared by all or most organisms. Hence, the reductionist tendency at the cellular and molecular level, the endeavor to reduce anything common denominators to penetrate at universal building stones. All biologists were to share the subject of biology would become one-sided. It is the student of systematics who helps to restore this. One of the major occupations of systematics is to determine comparison and the unique properties of every species and high. Another one is to determine that properties certain taxa have common with each other and what the biological causes for the differences or shared characters are. Finally, it concerns itself with variations within taxa. In this concern, systematics holds a unique and indispensable position among the biological sciences. Classification makes the organic diversity accessible to other biological disciplines. Without it, most of them would be unable to give meaning to their findings. Then systematics deals with population, species and higher taxa. No other branch of biology occupies itself in a similar manner with this level of integration in the organic world. It not only supplies urgently needed information about these levels, but more important, it cultivates a way of thinking, a way of approaching biological problems, which is tremendously important for the balance and well being of biology as a whole. As in every generation, there is also at present a questioning of the basic objective of taxonomy. Have recent development in other branches of biology made taxonomy superfluous? It is futile to search for a classification based on evolution. Is the method of binomial nomenclature in conduct with its function in information retrieval? Although these questions are sometimes posed on a manner to produce more heat than light, the taxonomist would ignore these obligations if he did not face them squarely and stimulating, if not provocating. Reading is provided by Mishna, Constance, and Rollins in 1964. The impression the taxonomist receives from a discriminating reading of the current biological literature is that there was never a greater need for a strong science of systematics than there is at the present. There is a need for someone to stress the diversity of the living world and most truly biological quality of organisms in the face of current reactionist tendencies. However legitimate the study is of that which all organisms have in common, and it is equally legitimate to study the unique characteristic of taxa at all levels down to the species, and this is precisely what the taxonomist is doing. And then next topic, terms and definitions. In systematic zoology, as in all branches of science, the danger of misunderstanding is greatly reduced by the precise definition of terms. Terms that are frequently used in this volume, such as species, type, polytypic, etc., will be carefully defined in the relevant chapters and in the glossary. Then zoological classification is the ordering of animals into groups or sets on the basis of their relationship, according to Simpson in 1961. In this sense, classification coincides largely with what is sometimes designated as beta taxonomy. Both usages are also so well established and so easily distinguished by the context that it would seem futile and impractical to try to restrict the term classification to only one of the two meanings. A certain amount of overlap between the terms systematic taxonomy and classification perhaps unavoidable and not necessarily harmful. And the process of classification is totally different from that of identification. In classification, we undertake the ordering of populations and groups of populations at all levels by inductive procedures. In classification, we place individuals by deductive procedures to previously established classes. Zoological nomenclature is the application of distinctive names to each of the groups recognized in the zoological classification. The rules governing it and the interpretation of these values will be presented later. The most important aspects of classification are the grouping and ranking of organisms. Precision and ambiguity of terms are of the utmost importance in these operations. Then, in the earlier taxonomic literature, there was frequent confusion between the zoological objects, which groups of population represent, and their rank in the hierarchy of taxonomic categories. These are two very different phenomena. We have somewhat analogous situations in our daily affairs. And French Smith is a concrete person, but captain or associate professor is his rank in the hierarchy of levels. So then, taxon, the word bluebirds, thrush, songbirds, or vertebrates refer to groups of organisms. These are the concrete objects of zoological classification. Any such group of populations is called a taxon, which zoology considers it sufficiently distinct to be worthy of being normally assigned to a discrete category in the hierarchical classification. As Simpson defines it, a taxon is a group of real organisms recognized as a formal unit at any level of a hierarchical classification. The same thought can also be expressed as follows: a taxon is a taxonomic group of any rank that is sufficiently distinct to be worthy of being assigned to a definite category. Then, definition calls attention to the fact that the delimitation of a taxon against other taxa of the same rank is often subject to the judgment of taxonomists. Two aspects must be stressed. A taxon always refers to as local objects. The species is not taxon, but a given species like robin is. Secondly, the taxon must be recognized by the taxonomist within any large genus. For instance, groups of species can be recognized. They are taxa only if and when are normally formally distinguished, as for instance by being recognized as subgenera. Otherwise, likewise, deems and geographical isolates becomes taxa when formally recognized as subspecies. And we speak of higher taxa such as thrush, birds or vertebrates, and other taxa such as bluebirds or robins. Taxa of species rank are what taxonomist orderly classifies, yet there is a great deal of variation in most taxa, as will be discussed in later chapters. The recognition that belongs to a given taxon of species rank is often the most difficult in classification owing to sexual dimorphism, seasonal changes, age, and genetic polymorphism. Then phenon. The first step in classification is the separation of reasonably firm samples and their assortment into taxa at the specific level, species level. These are generally accepted technical term for phylogenetically reasonable samples, but it may be designated as a phenon, a term introduced by Gilly in 1943 for phenotypically homologous samples at species level. Males and females often belong to different pheنا, while in the case of sibling species, it is possible that several species belong to a single phenon. The term morphospecies has sometimes been applied to what is there designated as a phenon. So, morphospecies is another term. So, recognition of a technical term for phenotypically uniform sample greatly facilitate the description of the taxonomic procedure. Its recognition is of particular importance, and the procedures of computer taxonomy. Sokal and Smith use this phenomenon in a very different sense, and the category it designates rank or level at a hierarchical classification. It is class the members of which are all the taxa assigned a given rank. Instance, the species category is a class the members of which are the taxa. A full understanding of the meaning of category depends on an understanding of hierarchical classification. Then terms such as species, genus, family, and other designate categories. A category, this is an abstract term, a class name, while the taxa placed in these categories are concrete zoological objects. Until the word taxonomy introduces into the literature, the term category was often used for both the group and for rank. For a full discussion of the theory of classification and the standard terms like Gregg and Beckna and Kane, Simpson and Buck and Hull. The contributions of systematics to biology. A consideration of the contribution of systematics to other branches of biology and to mankind as a whole adds to an appreciation of its leaders in many fields of biology have acknowledged their theorems in taxonomy. Elton made his statements in ecology. The extent to which progress in ecology depends upon accurate identification, upon the existence of a sound systematic groundwork for an animal, cannot be too much impressed upon the beginner in this. This is the essential basis of the whole thing. Without it, the helpless and the whole of his work may be rendered useless. So, no scientific ecological survey can be carried out without painstaking identification of all the species of ecological significance, and similar dependence on taxonomy is true for other areas of science. The entire geological chronology and stratigraphy hinges on the correct fraction of fossil key species. When the experimental biologist has to appreciate the necessity for sound taxonomy, there are many to appreciate. With two or three or more very similar species. The species of are more conspicuously in their physiological traits or in their cytology, in their external morphological characters. Every biologist will recall samples in which two workers came to very different conclusions. Samples in which two workers came to very different conclusions and the physiological properties of a certain species because in them had been working with species A and other species with B. Comparative biochemistry is widely interested in sound classification of evolution of molecules. An increasingly important area of research in biology can be understood only against the background of classification. It is solely in consultation with the taxonomist that list and determine what organisms might supply the key to learn about the evolution of organisms. Then one of the greatest assets of sound classification is its predictive nature. It permits extrapolation from known to previously unstudied characters. An analysis of a few species strategically scattered through the natural system may provide us with much of the needed information on distribution of new enzyme, hormone, or metabolic pathway. Many animals not be kept in the laboratory and others will not reproduce in captivity. A sound system will permit all sorts of inference from the genetically well-known types. The validity of these inferences, of course, is limited. The fact that every species is a unique system. Systematics can in many gaps in our knowledge that are inaccessible to the specialists of experimental branches of biology. There has been increasingly close collaboration in recent years among taxonomists and workers in immunology, in comparative biochemistry, in comparative physiology, and in the study of animal behavior. So, it may be proper to single out these specific areas to which taxonomy is made noteworthy contributions. Then, applied physiology. The contribution of taxonomy to the applied fields has been both direct and indirect. It relates to medicine, public health, agriculture, conservation, management of natural resources, etc. Taxonomic breakthroughs have been supplied the key to the solution of various perplexing problems in economic entomology.